Okay, so the question here is how to sneak in, I would say, nations' observational efforts into this rolling review of requirements. That really is something that comes from above as a kind of umbrella. And normally people that do observational work are not aware of it. So there might be some ways in entering into it. And yeah, I will show you some progress that we did. That's already good. So there are some graphics missing. It doesn't matter. So from a nation's point of view, what matters, of course, first of all, is nation's interest. And if we talk about global problems, then nations have to decide whether they want or not to support activities. And nations' interest is typically in EEZ, so in exclusive economic zones. It is on regional scale. But there is some interest in certain things that are so-called global commons or maybe European commons, such as the heat content. As we saw, there are directives like the fisheries directives or the MSFP, international treaties, Paris Agreement, and so forth. These are all things where nations may have an interest in observing also out of their national domain and also invest into observing out of that domain. Of course, for climate, you also have to kind of make sure that data is accessible, timely, could mean 2 years or 5 years. It just depends on the problem. It should be continuously there. It should have known sufficient quality, and that interacts with this best practice thing that Sabrina just mentioned. And for nations, what is also important is that we often kind of have to balance between monitoring, so mandated observing by your hydrographic office, by whatever, and science observing, what most of us are doing and what has a more problematic way into the system, so to say, and then reflecting really on national efforts, on national effects. Yeah, that's this review of requirement as you just saw it already. And what we do in Work Package 4 is we execute elements of that rolling review of requirement. We check it, so to say, along those different project application areas, I would call it, because they're different from the ones that are set high level. But these are more, say, close to the heart of the nations, and that's the reason why we picked them. And we execute them in teams. These are 6 tasks, and in the task there are different groups, there are different nations represented. So not all nations look into sea level, for example. Also, it might be an interest for all nations. We do not do it in the project. So that's just to say that what we do here is limited to the partnership of ObsSea4Clim, first of all. So it may put some other limitations too. Good. So what we came up with in Work Package 4 is what we called the 5-step process. The 5-step process is a bit like bringing that thing here into, with some background information, into a table first. So we looked, what the application area, project application area, which country, which is our region of interest, whatever. Labrador Sea is my region of interest, or FAMIS, but it might be someone who's doing something in the Mediterranean. Point of contact in the project. That's all easy. And then it starts getting a bit more tricky. Social application areas being addressed. You have to really think. Typically, science is not being done for social application areas, but yeah, think about it. Then the scientific approach that's being applied. Of course, you can use different approaches for the same kind of problem. Sea level can be determined through different ways in observing it. Then it really gets tricky. How is the connection to the implementation plan, to the GCOS implementation plan? Meaning you have to know that there is an implementation plan and you have to know how to get entrance into it. And what is the source of the requirements? Again, maybe it's worth also to discuss wording for requirements, I think. That could be very, very different, what you mean with that. The reason why we want to do that 5-step process is outlined here. We would like to have, we have 6 deliverables in month 34, something like that. For each application area, 1. And what we would like to have is we would like to harmonize these output being written in the deliverables according to what's structured in that process here, to make it easier to digest the information from these application areas in work package 2, for example, but also in other work. Good. This is just an example from Norway, in this case for sea level and for ocean transport. And I don't want to go through it, but yeah, so that was our first iteration, so to say, after we defined that milestone 15, where everything is being written. Okay. So then we had a critical review internally and looked into how that worked, actually, filling that out. And one thing that came to our attention is that we have to put, for example, more emphasis into the implementation plan and also into the ECD requirements. So really socializing that maybe, and also understanding how is the IP being addressed? How can it be addressed? So what we did was kind of looking into, you do not expect you to read that, but it's from the implementation plan. These are all the different targets for the implementation plan. And what you see on the upper part here is the different organizations, the different groups that are expected from GCOS to implement these different things here. So in other words, for example, for Italy, you would look which research organization in Italy is addressing some of these different things here. And then, if everything works well, you can even find someone you can report this information to, and all of a sudden, whoop, there is an appearance of whatever, CMCC, because you're addressing a certain implementation here as a contributor to the implementation plan of GCOS. So that's actually what we thought is kind of interesting to do. This is just a summary now, what all might be relevant for the ocean. And so we further developed our 5-step process. And this is now a table, in this case, it's from the FARE, where we also included scientific approach, so data being used, national focal points, because it became apparent that an important contact, an important entry point are these national focal points and getting into contact with them. And there's this last line here, which is the estimate, so to say, or how FARE are seeing their effort here related to what's being written in the implementation plan. Good. Okay, then executing further. We then found out, well, we have to further think about how to structure that. We came to a conclusion, for example, there's a lack of knowledge about focal points. And if you have that lack, then it's already stopped. You cannot propagate your information any further. There's actually also, that goes hand in hand a bit with a focal point. There's many countries a very weak link between weather services that actually set up all the system for the weather, as Sabrina explained, and the ocean. So often you cannot really connect to them just because there's no connection, particularly for research. Then there might be no national GCOS meeting or GCOS reporting the ocean is aware of. So there is no way to impact. And it's quite interesting to see how that is being reflected. What you see here on the right is actually the National Climate, that's a National Climate Action Plan, I think it's called. Yeah. So at the end, it's the report that documents every 5 years, I think, or every 7 years, how a country is doing against the Paris Agreement. And that I will show you later, another example. That is actually where you would like to see CMCC, for example. You would like to see CMCC as a contributor under this chapter, systematic observations. And this is actually what the bottom up kind of wants to. Good. And so we have to from the learning, we also have to kind of change or modify the 5-step process. Okay, so revising that 15 is requires some more thinking and another kind of round of brainstorming. What we would like to have, of course, is to identify the progress in implementing the GCOS. It's maybe more on the project side, to maybe even define some KPIs on what ObsSea4Clim made in order to really have nations being better integrated in delivering information to the process that sits above. Maybe have a cookbook on how nations could, for example, make their observation efforts ready for the WMO process, which at the end is WIGOS. It's a WMO integrated global observing system. And then that goes a bit hand in hand, work on how to implement ocean data into this OSCAR tool that also Sabrina showed. And I can show you that also here in an application case, so to say. These are all observations on land, and these observations are all already integrated into OSCAR. If you click on that one little dot here, you get that thing. It's the OSCAR web tool, what you see here. And then if you click on that, then you get a new page, which actually is now OSCAR. And in OSCAR, you can see for that little, station, you can see a lot of more information that you see. So that's what we want for each country on each observation as a result from ObsSea4Clim. Good, just what that means. So if we are in that system, and an entry point into the system would be OceanObs, then in OceanObs you get this WIGOS ID, and then there's a link being created, not really operational yet, but this is an example for Norway. And it's interesting. So Norway from 1990 to today, there have been exactly 375 observations platforms being registered. And most of them, as you can see here, are Argo. There are a few gliders, but that's it, right? And that's not a lot, I have to say. And that's actually what ideally or mostly would find entrance into WMO, because that's the entry pass. Good, this is a busy slide, but it just tells you again this national contribution to the Paris Agreement for Norway. And what is good is that in Norway, they have a chapter on systematic observations, and they also have in that chapter oceanographic observations. So it's already in there, but it's not very detailed, I think, and the report is short. This is another one, of course. I know you always think that Germany is doing so well. I mean, at least the report is much longer. Instead of 47 pages, now 269. And it has even a chapter on oceans. And I think that's already something that I hope we will all, I hope we will all get to, right? Good, and with that, I close here. And probably that was too long. But anyway.